I hope you realize why we're asking you to look up ethanol, and it's because of the very last couple questions on that activity, the Pogel activity talk about ethanol. So let's just, should we do it? I had him do it, look for it now. Should we talk about it now or come back to it? Okay, so just keep that in mind. Whatever you just figured out, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. So when we get to the ethanol questions and we can talk about some of those alternative fuel sources, you guys can help with the conversation, and so it gets less of like us talking at you about it. So let's take a look at that Pogel activity. The Pogel activity, we got a power switch first, Mr. DeBoer. Yep. Yeah, that's on there this year.
It's amazing how things work so much better when there's,
And they're on.
yeah, crazy.
So let's go grab it. All right, so let's talk quick. That first diagram on page 1. The intent of that is it's an overview of cellular respiration and photosynthesis. It just simply calls it respiration. When I think of respiration, I think about breathing. Okay, that's what I think about when I think about breathing. So when we talk about this, I'm not going to call it respiration. I'm going to call it cellular respiration. And the reason I call it cellular respiration is because that's what most of our textbooks are going to refer to it as. Let me rephrase that. Most textbooks refer to it as cellular respiration because it's not you going through respiration, it's your cells and the process that occurs in each and every cell in your body. So we talk about cellular respiration versus photosynthesis. So let's start with photosynthesis. What organisms go through photosynthesis? And if you have talked, it'd be great, because then it's not just us talking. Yeah. Plants. What's that?
Plant organisms?
Yeah, plants. Okay, plants is probably the #1 organism that we talk about when we talk about photosynthesis. Plants go through the process of photosynthesis, and that's not new. We knew that. That's something we learned in elementary school science, probably. Okay, so plants go through the process of photosynthesis. There's other organisms besides plants that also go through photosynthesis. So we often say plants are the organism that go through photosynthesis, but realize there are some others. Algae, for example, also goes through photosynthesis, as well as some forms of bacteria go through photosynthesis. Okay, so it's not just plants, but that's the common go-to. Like who goes through? Plants go through, absolutely, plants go through photosynthesis. So some bacteria, plants, and algae go through photosynthesis. Now photosynthesis is really nothing more, well I shouldn't make it sound easy and simple, it's actually very complex of what the processes are going on. But photosynthesis is the process where plants, so bacteria, and algae take energy and they convert it into a different form. Ultimately, where does all energy on Earth originate?
The sun?
The sun, absolutely, from the sun. Okay, all energy on Earth originates from the sun. We cannot lay in the sun and absorb energy. And I say that statement isn't 100% correct. Because if you lay in the sun and you go like, the sun is nice and warm, you technically are absorbing energy. You're absorbing heat energy. But that's not the type of energy we're talking about. You laying in the sun isn't going to be like, ooh, just got my dose of sunlight, I can go run a mile now. That's not what we're talking about. Okay, so photosynthesis is where we take energy from the sun and we convert, plants, some bacteria and algae, take energy from the sun and they convert it into a different form. So when we talk about this, we have our chemical equations listed for photosynthesis, also for cellular respiration. Those are things I expect you to know. Don't be surprised to have to fill those out on the test. Don't be surprised on a test to be able to label a diagram similar to this. In years past we've done this. I don't know why we've changed it all of a sudden, but last year a diagram very similar to this was labeled on their test. So I would expect that to happen again this year. Full disclosure. Okay, so when we talk about the photosynthesis equation, what we have, that one actually doesn't work. That Carbon dioxide, CO2, C6, CO2 is carbon dioxide. And when we think of carbon dioxide, I hope you're all thinking like, well, I guess breathed out. Yeah, that's carbon dioxide. Okay, so carbon dioxide is used by plants. What else do plants need to live? Well, they need water, right? You don't water your plants, they die. They dry up and die. There are some plants that can absorb water through the air, but that's not super common. You gotta water them. And they need some type of energy. Now, in the case of plants, that energy is sun's energy or light energy. Okay? And the process that photosynthesis goes, it converts the energy from the sun, and it converts it into another form of energy, chemical energy stored in chemical bonds. And it's for the molecule C6H12O6, which is also referred to as glucose. Now, glucose is nothing more than what is glucose? Yeah.
A form of sugar?
Absolutely, it's a form of sugar. Some other forms of sugar that we sometimes talk about is fructose. Sometimes we talk about sucrose. Sometimes we talk about lactose. Okay, maybe you're lactose intolerant. It means you can't digest milk sugar. If you put sugar on your cereal this morning because your Captain Crunch wasn't sweet enough, or your Lucky Charms need a little bit extra sweetness, that's sucrose. It's a different form of sugar. Okay, so glucose is it's our kind of go-to for the type of sugar. The OSE ending represents sugar molecules. There's other types of sugars. There's lots of other types of sugars. I don't know why glucose is the one, but whenever they talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration, glucose is the molecule that they talk about. And I'm not exactly sure why. But really what glucose is, it's a type of sugar, and we eat sugars. Okay, and why do we eat sugars? We eat sugars for energy. Okay? So plants go through and they take carbon dioxide, they take water and energy from the sun, and they convert it into glucose and oxygen molecules. So something on this diagram that we'd like to point out is what goes in and what goes out of each thing. So coming out of photosynthesis, we have glucose molecules and we have oxygen molecules. The organelle in which photosynthesis occurs in plants, plant cells, is the chloroplast. Okay, and from last unit, I'm assuming you know what a chloroplast does. And it's the organelle found in plants that the process of photosynthesis occurs. And there's different things in there. There's those little stacks, and they're going to be called thylakoids, and a stack of those called stroma. And that's part of your guided notes that we'll kind of get into. But for right now, chloroplast is really all we're concerned about. There's chloroplast in plants that photosynthesis occurs. And what comes out of photosynthesis? Glucose and oxygen. So, why are plants important for us? What do plants produce that we must have, otherwise we'll die? Yeah.
Oxygen.
Oxygen, right? If we don't have oxygen, you suffocate and you die. We need oxygen in order for our life to exist, and we'll talk about why in a second. Okay, but we need that oxygen. I think there's like the thing of threes. You can survive about 3 minutes without oxygen. Okay, after 3 minutes, your body, your cells start to shut down. Okay, it's not good. So you need about oxygen every 3 minutes, well, more often, but if you deprive yourself of oxygen for 3 minutes, basically death can ensue. So we need oxygen. What else do plants produce that help us live and survive? What's the other thing produced by photosynthesis? Glucose, right? So sugars. Why are sugars important for us to live?
Energy.
Energy, absolutely. It's our energy source. What happens if you don't eat any food or get any energy after about 30 some days? It's about 30 days you can go without food. You die. Okay? You can go, wait, what are the three? I think it's about 3 minutes without oxygen, about 3 days without water, and about 30 days without food. It's something like that. They kind of group in the threes. Okay? So about 30 days you can go without food. Now I'm not going to say you're going to be full of energy and running around and like, I feel great. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying you should be able to survive. Okay, so the fact that plants take energy from the sun and they convert it into oxygen, necessary for us to live, and convert it into glucose, which is a form of energy, which is necessary for us to live, is crucial for the survival of us and almost every other organism on Earth in order to be alive. Okay, so that is what we require. So this is what goes into cellular respiration. All living organisms go through cellular respiration. All living organisms go through cellular respiration. I will repeat that one more time. All living organisms go through cellular respiration. Do you go through cellular respiration? Yes. Does the bunny that I just saw hop by the window, just pretending that there was one. Hey, look, a bunny just hopped by the window. Did that go through cellular respiration? What about the grass I see outside? Does that go through cellular respiration? Yes. All living things go through cellular respiration. So what is cellular respiration? Glad you asked. Cellular respiration is the process that occurs in our cells, in each and every cell in our body, that takes glucose, sugar, energy molecules. There's different forms of energy, but cellular respiration deals with glucose. Realize you can get energy from fats, you can get energy from protein. We generically talk about sugars, though. Okay, so we have glucose molecule, which is a form of energy, and we need oxygen. And then what happens is it converts that chemical energy stored in the bonds of glucose molecules into a different form of energy that your cells can readily use. And that type of energy is referred to as ATP. And ATP is something like your muscle cells will then, oh, hey, I got some ATP, I can contract. My heart is a muscle, so basically because my heart has ATPs available, it can beat, which is contraction, but my heart can beat, which is good because that's life, right? Your heart stops beating, that's bad. Okay, so ATP is the energy that our cells readily use, but they can't use sugars directly. So you could eat lots of sugar, but if it doesn't get converted into ATP, you die. So what prevents sugars from being converted? Well, we need both sugar and oxygen. So if we cut oxygen out of the system, you might have eaten a full lunch right before you stop breathing. I don't know why you stop breathing. Okay, but if you just have you have a full belly full of sugars, but if you don't have oxygen to convert that, what happens is your cells starve themselves of energy. There is no ATP available for them to perform whatever function those cells are designed for. Maybe it's brain cells to send nerve impulses. Maybe it's your heart to beat. Okay, things like that. So you need both sugar and oxygen, and whichever one runs out first shuts this thing down. It's called limiting reactants. So if you run out of oxygen, cellular respiration can't occur and you die. If you don't eat enough food, even though you're breathing just fine, but you don't eat food for like 30 some days because you're on a deserted desert island and there's absolutely no food available for you. If you do not eat food for like 30 some days, you're breathing plenty of oxygen, but you don't have the glucose. So because there's no glucose, you can't create ATP, convert it to ATP, and then you die. Okay, so that's the idea. Glucose plus oxygen converts that into ATP. And what are the other byproducts of cellular respiration? We want the ATP. That's why cells go through cellular respiration, is for the ATP. But as a result, you produce carbon dioxide and you produce some water. Now, just for the record, CO2 is carbon dioxide. CO, it's carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide and dioxide are different. One has two oxygen, one has one di versus mono. But in terms of, you probably have a carbon monoxide. Let me rephrase that. I hope you have a carbon monoxide detector in your house. If not, you should talk to your parents about buying it. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas that can be produced when things don't, generally like propane, natural gas combustions aren't done completely. Okay, if your furnace isn't functioning properly, it could be releasing carbon monoxide into your house. If your hot water heater hot water heater isn't working properly, it could be releasing carbon monoxide into your house. And you say, is that bad? Yeah, that's deadly bad. What happens with carbon monoxide is it sticks to the red blood cells, the hemoglobin in red blood cells, and it prevents oxygen molecules from sticking to it and transporting it throughout your body. So if a carbon monoxide molecule gets stuck on, it doesn't want to let go, and oxygen is not allowed to get transported to your body. Basically, you could suffocate if you have carbon monoxide stuck to your hemoglobin. So you don't know it because it doesn't smell. You don't know it because you can't see it. You can't smell it. Generally, the typical sign of carbon monoxide poisoning is you have a headache, which other things can cause headaches, right? I wake up in the morning, most mornings, and I have a headache. It's because I haven't drank my coffee yet. I'm going through caffeine with it. Okay, so there are other things besides carbon monoxide that can cause headaches. That's why having a carbon monoxide detector is important. Okay, so it's the public service announcement. If you don't know if you have one, you should ask. If you don't have one, you should suggest that you go get one. They aren't too bad. I think $10 maybe. I don't think they're too crazy. You should have one. You should get one for the safety of your family, especially
It's
if you live in the lower level of your house. What's that?
pretty much standard.
You're
Well,
supposed to have,
yeah.
yeah. Just like you're supposed to have a smoke detector, they recommend that you have a carbon monoxide detector. Okay, so the idea though is carbon dioxide comes out, water molecules come out. Now, what do you notice about the photosynthesis equation versus the cellular respiration equation? Compare and contrast. Or look for, what do you notice about those two equations? I'm sorry, what?
Different answers.
They have different final, well, we didn't talk about that, final products and reactants. Yeah, they end up with different things, right? So photosynthesis has the reactants and products, I should have mentioned that. So reactants in a chemical reaction are what we start with, the products are what we end up with, like the final product, right? Your final product is what you sell if you're in a business, if you're manufacturing something. Chemical reaction, the final product, is what is on the right side of the arrow. So the products of photosynthesis and cellular respiration are different, absolutely. The product of photosynthesis is glucose and oxygen, whereas the products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of ATP. I didn't mention also where that occurs, but we gotta come back to that. So they have different products, they also have different reactants. Look at the reactants of one and compare to the products of the other. How about that? I'll give you that little tip. Look at the reactants of photosynthesis. So what does photosynthesis start with? It starts with carbon dioxide, water, and energy. That's what photosynthesis starts with. That's the reactants. And look at the products of cellular respiration. What does cellular respiration end up with? Yeah.
A loop.
Yeah, it's a loop. They're inverse of each other. They're opposites of each other, right? So the products of one are the reactants for the next. And then the products of that one are the reactants for the next. It's a loop. It's a system. It's a cycle. Okay? Now what happens if all of a sudden the sun were to, I don't know, flip a switch and just go off right now? What would happen to life? Or what would happen? First of all, if the sun went out right now, would the sky go dark right now?
No, in 8 minutes or what?
8 minutes. Okay, the sun is so far away, even though the speed of light is really, really fast, it takes 8 minutes for the light to reach Earth. So if the sun went out right now, we won't know for 8 minutes. 8 minutes and I think it's like 20-some seconds, but about 8 minutes. Okay, so there's that, which is kind of always weird. But let's say, okay, now it's dark out. There is no sun, it's pitch dark. What's going to happen to life on this Earth? How would it be different? Why would it have any impact? What happens if sunlight disappears? Nothing will grow. The plants will die unless we produce, like turn on grow lights and stuff, right? But nothing will grow. So what? I don't like my vegetables anyways. I like hamburgers, I like steak, get rid of that lettuce stuff, who needs that, right?
Animals that feed on those plants also die.
Absolutely. The plants, the animals that feed directly off of those plants will die. And then those animals die, then the next organism, food chain stuff, right? Then the next one dies, and the next one dies, and the next one. So if plants like cease to exist, where does all energy on Earth originate? The sun, and then from the sun it goes to plants, and then from the plants it goes to some other organism, right?
The energy pyramid collapses.
Yeah, life would be very different. Could it continue? We'd have to get creative, right? We would
Probably
have
freeze
to
to
figure, what's that?
We probably freeze to death.
There is that. It would get very, very cold. It would get very, very cold. And you say, well, I'm just gonna turn my heat up. Okay. Could, but at some point we'd run out of natural gas probably. We could dig underground for insulation, that might help. We could turn on some grow lights to help keep growing plants. We gotta produce electricity to do that. And there's other issues, right? This is like sci-fi, apocalyptic kind of things, right? But ultimately, life would be very different because all energy originates from the sun. Plants are key for this. Photosynthesis occurs in chloroplasts. I forgot to mention cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria. What is the function of a mitochondria? What does the organelle of the mitochondria do? A lot of you would say, what's the function of the mitochondria? And you'd say the window cell. Powerhouse of the cell. What the heck does that mean? Well, what it means is it takes glucose and it converts it into energy that our cells can use. It converts it into heat. Okay, any questions about this? Good, let's turn to page 4, the diagram of the carbon cycle. So why the heck do we care about the carbon cycle? Why the heck is the carbon cycle in here? And if you notice, it all most arrows point to this bubble up the top, the atmosphere of carbon dioxide. So why is there carbon dioxide in the air? Because I get breathed out. You breathed out? Breathed in, breathed out. Breathed?
Mm-hmm.
Breathed? That's the thing? Breathed. You breathed out. Okay? Because that little bunny rabbit in your diagram is going through cellular respiration, it exhales carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay? Because that car burned gas, diesel, propane, your school buses burn propane. Because they burned something, it released carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Because you heat your house with wood, you have a wood stove, you're burning wood, you're producing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Because there's wildfires burning out west, there's carbon dioxide being released. Because that decomposer, the rabbit died, and now it's rotten, and there's these little microorganisms eating the dead corpse of the rabbit. They're breathing out, they're releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Right? So what organisms go through cellular respiration? All living things go through cellular respiration. So if you look at arrow letter C, letter B, and letter A, those arrows going back to the atmospheric carbon dioxide, A, B, and C, those are all due to respiration. Cellular respiration occurs in all three of those organisms, therefore, carbon dioxide is being released in the atmosphere. Now, how does that carbon dioxide come out of the atmosphere? Line letter D right there, how is that carbon dioxide coming out? Goes to a plant, because plants use photosynthesis. And they remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they produce glucose. And then what happens to that glucose? What does that bunny do to get glucose?
Ingest it?
It ingests it. It eats that lovely flower on that picture. And then it breathes. It goes through its daily function and it exhales carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Now, if we cover up the automobile and that bottom carbon stores, we would say that this system is carbon neutral. Okay, we would say this is a relatively carbon neutral system, which means the amount of carbon dioxide that is being emitted by those living things through cellular respiration is being reabsorbed by plants to produce sugars. We would say this is carbon neutral. Now, what happens if there's more rabbits? Well, they're going to breathe more, which means there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And if there aren't any more plants, then the carbon dioxide level is going to increase. If a lot of the rabbits die, well, now there's less rabbits eating, therefore less carbon dioxide, therefore there's going to be less carbon dioxide. I guess that. So why the heck do we care about carbon dioxide? What's the big deal about carbon dioxide?
It's a greenhouse gas.
Absolutely, it's a greenhouse gas. Greenhouse gases are a gas that gets around the atmosphere, in our atmosphere, that lets sunlight's energy come in, but it doesn't let it back out. If you ever walk into a greenhouse, like at Ace Hardware during the summer, they have the doors open, it's a nice sunny day, you walk in and you're like, woo, it's hot in here. And the reason is that energy from the sun comes out and it doesn't escape very readily. That's exactly what happens here on Earth. So, carbon dioxide is a major greenhouse gas. It's not the only greenhouse gas, but it's one of the most looked at ones. And the reason why it's one of the most looked at ones is because we have probably the biggest impact on it. So if you look on some websites like NASA, they talk about climate change, they talk about carbon dioxide levels, and I hope we all I think we would probably all agree that NASA is probably a pretty reputable source. If you look at their websites, there's carbon dioxide graphs that they can track it from long periods of time. They can look at ice cores from Antarctica from thousands of years ago, and they can look at how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere back then. Okay, they can measure how much carbon dioxide is there right now, and then tomorrow, and the next day, if they have a station set up. Okay, so what happens is we have a general trend in our recent history that our carbon dioxide levels are increasing. And according to NASA's website, about 90% of actively publishing climatologists, so climatologists are scientists who study the climate, they say that we, humans, are probably the primary cause of this carbon dioxide. And the reason is because of this. Okay? We burn a lot of things. Okay? And a lot of the things we burn come from these fossil fuels, so they can refer to as a carbon storm. So again, if we covered up those two things, the system is a pretty carbon neutral. Okay, it's pretty carbon neutral. But what happens is when we start extracting these fossil fuels from the ground, that's carbon that once was in the atmosphere, was transformed into a different, like glucose, by plants millions of years ago. Maybe it was eaten by a dinosaur millions of years ago. And then the conditions were right that those got trapped underground and they formed something called fossil fuels. That carbon dioxide was removed from the atmosphere and is stored or sunk in the ground. We sometimes call them carbon sink. And the idea is if that carbon dioxide is sunk in the ground, it's not floating around in our atmosphere. It's gone. It's out of the cycle. It's out of the cycle. Until someone comes and pumps it up, digs it up, mines it, whatever, and we start burning it. So now what happens is we have this carbon dioxide that was not in our system for millions of years, and now we're pulling out and we're burning and we're releasing in the atmosphere, which is causing a big shift in the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. And it has definitely impacts on our climate. So we don't really use the term, and scientists don't use the term global warming that much anymore. And it's not because it's wrong, it's just it's more of one piece of the bigger picture. So when we talk about climate change, and the reason why climate change is used as global warming is one of the symptoms of climate change is global warming. But just because it gets warmer in one location, doesn't mean it's getting warmer everywhere. What happens is it causes jet streams to shift, and when jet streams shift, pockets of colder air come in at some points and go warmer in other, so we get a whole shift of the climate, not necessarily just heating. So if we, any one thing that we do here, like there's more rabbits, 7.8 billion people on Earth, I think someone looked up yesterday. Okay, we're up to 7.8, so there's more of us that we're breathing more. Okay, because there's more of us, we're using more fossil fuels, we're burning more. Okay, so there's lots of different things. We're removing plants, we're deforesting. Okay, we're cutting down extra trees, we're cutting down rainforests, we're pulling those plants out of this cycle, which has big implications. Let's turn to the last page. Okay, ethanol. You did a little bit of research. Tell me about how they make ethanol for cars. Give me the basic overview. Yeah.
They produce from any plant.
Okay, they take plants. Generally in the United States we use corn. And we
Got the sugar from it.
get the sugar from it. So when we're talking about a corn plant, we're talking about the kernels from the corn plant. So we cut off the corn kernels, we take the sugar, and then we,
Burn it.
nope. What is ethanol? I guess let's start there. Ethanol is a form of alcohol. Did you guys know that? It's alcohol. Ethanol is also found in beer, wine, and hard liquor. That's that type of alcohol is ethanol. It's called grain alcohol. Okay, so we take the sugars from the corn plant, and we gotta make alcohol.
You turn it into carbs, right?
Into a what?
Carbs, carbohydrates, and
Right, so the sugar already is a type of carbohydrate. It is a carbohydrate. Now, depending on what kind of carbohydrate, we might have to break those carbohydrates down. But they use a product, or a microorganism called like yeast, and they ferment it. So how do you make beer? How do you make wine? You take some sugary plant solution, and you put yeast in it, and it ferments. That's how you make alcohol. So with corn, they take corn mash, corn water, they put some yeast in it, and it ferments. Now, in the business of ethanol, like even for cars, they call it beer. They basically make a type of beer. You don't drink this beer, but it's a type of beer. And that's right around 5 to 15%, I'll say. It's probably not 15, but whatever. Okay, about 5 to 15% alcohol. That's not gonna burn in your car. Okay? So somehow we have to boost the amount of alcohol content because higher alcohol content is flammable, it's combustible, right? So they do something called distillation, and now we have some very high concentration that is flammable and combustible. There's other plants that we can do that with. Sugarcane has lots of sugar in it, okay? So it's a better plant for this. Have you ever seen sugarcane growing in Wisconsin? I haven't. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in some greenhouses somewhere, but why don't we grow sugarcane here if it's better? Our climate. It doesn't work in our climate, okay? Brazil, amazing for sugarcane, amazing for ethanol production. They burn almost no fossil fuels in that country because they can use ethanol so exclusively. So, what are some advantages and disadvantages of using ethanol as a fuel source produced from corn?
So, advantages, it can lower carbon dioxide.
It can reduce carbon dioxide. Now the reason we're still burning ethanol, right? So we're still releasing ethanol with the combustion of ethanol. But where did that carbon dioxide come from? Well, it came from a plant. How long ago did that plant pull the carbon dioxide out of the air? A year, 2 years, 3 years, recent history, right? So we're still burning something, we're still releasing carbon dioxide, but a plant pulled that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in a short period of time. Compared to fossil fuels was millions and millions of years ago. So we would say that ethanol is more carbon neutral in our system. Okay, the amount of carbon dioxide being used or pulled from the atmosphere by plants, which then we use and burn again, is more carbon neutral. Okay, it's better for our environment from that standpoint. We aren't burning these fossil fuels. It also prolongs our fossil fuel deposits, right? Basically, we're diluting our gas with ethanol. If you go to a Quick Trip, most of your gas is going to have at least 10%, or is going to have 10% ethanol in it. Okay, there's one of their gas pumps says 15. There are some gas stations you can buy 85% ethanol, and there's some that are 0. So what are some disadvantages of ethanol? Yeah.
It takes time to make and you can't just find it in the ground.
You can't, yeah, right, you gotta grow corn, assuming corn, we gotta grow the corn, we gotta harvest corn, we gotta make ethanol, then we gotta ship the ethanol. Compared to, we pump it out of the ground, we refine it, and then we ship it. Okay, so the process might take longer. Okay, and from the time of planting to actual use. There's some mechanical issues that I think sometimes people often cite. A lot of times if you take your cars or some of your small engines to a mechanic, they will often say you shouldn't use ethanol in like your lawnmowers, your snowmobiles. There's some people that are very adamant that it's not good for certain engine components. Okay, so there's some of that. But how do we plant corn? Farmers use they walk around the field and throw seeds on the ground like back in the old days. They use a horse. No, we use which burns fuel, right? Generally diesel or gas. Okay? And then we fertilize our corn using a tractor. And then we harvest our corn using a tractor. And then we ship our corn using a semi. All of this uses fossil fuels in the production of this. So some people will argue that we aren't necessarily coming out ahead. We have to use fossil fuels in order to produce this renewable resource. Okay? I'll try to go quick here on this in the last part. Any questions about ethanol? Ethanol is not bad from the standpoint of carbon neutrality. It's better. It's better. Corn isn't the best because of a corn plant. The only thing that they're currently using is the kernels from the corn cob. There's some research. They can do it. There's other parts. They're working on making it economical to use the entire corn stalk. And they call it corn stover. So plants have a cell wall made of cellulose. That's cellulose, a bunch of glucose molecules stuck together. They're working on enzymes that chop up all the cell walls, and then we can ferment that. This is not ready for high-scale production. So in the United States, most of our electricity comes from coal-powered power plants. Does anybody know where the closest coal-powered power plant to us right now is? Either they're shy, Mr. DeBoer, or they don't know.
Wasatile.
Near, are you saying Wasatile produces coal electricity, or it's near Wasatile?
Near.
Near, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, so if you're going south towards Stevens Point, okay, you get on the highway here, you're heading south, you go over the Lake Wassa, you go over the Wisconsin River, hey, look, there's Cedar Creek Cinema on the left. Okay, oh, look, there's Wassa Homes, that pond. Beyond that, you see those two big stacks, smokestacks? That's a coal power plant. Okay, we produce coal electricity just on the river. Okay, there are some other things that they also use in natural gas. There's a paper mill right across from Rothschild Elementary called Domtar. Domtar also has a very big smokestack, but that does not burn coal. That burns. Anybody know? Burns wood. It's a biomass plant. Okay, so it burns wood. Okay, so both are burning stuff. The idea of coal is we're burning a fossil fuel, we're releasing carbon that was stuck in the ground millions of years ago. In biomass plant, we're burning trees that was maybe 40 years ago. Much better carbon neutrality, okay? Because the carbon dioxide being released is gonna get reabsorbed by trees in our lifetime to then get burned again. We call it renewable because of that. So beyond that, what other types of electricity can we use, produce, what other forms can we produce electricity with that aren't coal? Is it coal or any fossil, burning any fossil fuel? And produce that does not increase carbon dioxide. So basically, we can't burn anything. That's really what we're saying. Yeah.
Solar energy.
Solar energy, and when we think of solar energy, most of us think of solar panels on rooftops, yes. Okay, it's something that you and I, if we had the money and we wanted to, we could invest in, we could put on our roofs, and we could produce electricity for our homes and the community at 0 emissions once they're produced. Okay, there's other forms of solar. In the Southwest, they have these big reflective mirrors, there's different ways you can produce electricity, but solar panels on rooftops is generally what we think. What else?
Hydroelectricity.
Hydroelectricity, so we use water, moving water to produce electricity. There is a hydroelectric dam downtown Wausau. If you're sitting at the Whitewater kayak course and you look over the kayak course, there's a hydroelectric power plant just beyond that, owned by Wisconsin Public Service. The Mosinee paper mill. If you go into downtown Mosinee, you go past the paper mill, you go over the river, you go over the river again, to your left, there's a hydroelectric dam. The Mosinee paper mill produces hydroelectric power. The Hoover Dam is a hydroelectric power plant. Okay? What else?
Is radiation considered one or no?
When you say radiation, you're saying like nuclear power,
Yeah.
right? Yes, that is. Yeah, nuclear power is a form of energy. It's a way we can produce electricity that does not release carbon dioxide. We're using splitting of atoms to release energy, which then can produce electricity. Yeah, absolutely. There's one more common one that people generally pull.
I forget what it's called. It's the wind one, right?
Yeah, wind energy, absolutely. We just call it wind, where we have wind turbines. So those are typically the 4 that we come up with that people will go through and say, hey, if we did this, we could then produce electricity without burning stuff. Why don't we do it then? Well, cost, coal and natural gas are cheap. We can produce a lot of it. Why don't we use nuclear energy? Because then we have to deal with the nuclear waste that's associated with it. Today it's sunny. It wasn't yesterday. Solar energy doesn't work very good on a sunny day, on a cloudy day, or at night. It doesn't really look like the wind is blowing right now, so wind wouldn't work very well. You know, so some of these by themselves aren't great as a standalone, but collectively, we, as a society, we do some of these other things, and like, hey, it's not windy today, but it's sunny. Or it's not sunny, but the water's still flowing down the river. Combinations of these help make our infrastructure pretty strong, okay? Or, of course, we have alien technology, although, was the Death Star due to alien technology, or was that like...
Well, it's hard to say, because that was in a
Historical-
galaxy far, far away, a long time ago.
in a galaxy
Yeah.
far, far away,
So-
so, yeah. The dilithium?
Crystals.
No, wait, that was, which one had the
That was-
dilithium? That
that
was
was-
Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
The Death Star had cyber crystals, or I don't know. Okay,
We actually took time to research that
yeah, we
yesterday.
researched that one. Okay, so these are some other forms of energy that we can produce electricity without burning stuff, which doesn't emit carbon dioxide, which then should slow climate change. Okay, because with climate change, we have other symptoms. Ice caps melt, sea levels rise, ocean currents change, jet streams shift. Okay, bigger implications than just like it's 70 degrees last weekend, or it's -30 because the polar vortex is spiking. Okay, there's bigger issues that go along with this stuff. Okay, so tomorrow, your virtual day assignment, we didn't get this to you yet. There's a paper copy of your virtual day assignment right here on the front corner of the desk. It is also posted via Canvas as a Google Doc and a PDF. There is a video recorded and a Google Slides presentation. Submit those due tomorrow at the end of your virtual day. If you want a paper copy, you should grab a paper copy before you leave here today. Have a great and wonderful and a productive day, everyone.
Bye, guys.